From the Corner Office is brought to you by Synovus Bank, championing business growth through trusted, relationship-driven banking throughout the Gulf Coast region. Rebecca Shafir does something few have the courage to do. Try to help people who talk and make decisions for a living, like hard-charging executives, to slow down and be more mindful listeners. She does that through her book, The Zen of Listening, Mindful Communication in the Age of Distraction, and one-on-one coaching. Helping executives grow their skill set, both the soft skills and the hard skills, is a key why for the Business Observer. To read stories like those and more, subscribe. Go to businessobserverfl.com. Hello and welcome to the Business Observers from the Corner Office podcast. I'm Mark Gordon, managing editor of the Business Observer. Today's guest is Rebecca Shafir, founder of Mindful Communication and author of The Zen of Listening, Mindful Communication in the Age of Distraction. Rebecca, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark. It's my pleasure.
Excellent. We're going to talk about being a good listener, which, we hear that phrase throughout our lives, and it comes up a lot on this podcast as well, but definitely want to get your insights into that and talk about your career. But before we do that, we are going to have our audience get to know you a little bit better. And I think we're pretty cool here at From the Corner Office and the Business Observer. We're constantly trying to upgrade our listening experience here. And we're going to do that with a new set of rapid fire questions. Rebecca, I hope that you're okay with you're the debut on this.
You bet.
We're going to do this super cool, this or that. Okay. So I'm going to ask you this or that leadership style questions, and you're just going to tell me which one you prefer, and we're going to roll through it. You ready?
Ready, go.
All right. This or that leadership edition, vision or execution?
Ooh, I would say a mix of the two. That's a tough one. In order to execute properly and efficiently, there's got to be a clear vision that's communicated to all. That's a mix.
All right, a mix. Data or intuition? Data or your gut?
Oh boy, Mark, you're throwing these combinations at me again. How can, intuition is strong. I would say that is often what leads companies, what leads leaders to make good decisions. However, the data is important. So if I had to pick one, I might go with intuition.
Got it. Consensus or decisiveness? As a leader, consensus or decisiveness?
Oh boy. Again, it may be a mix. Good decisions are based on getting concessions from your workers. How can you make good decisions unless everybody's at the table?
Got it. Optimism or realism?
Oh, that's a dandy. I think realism, if I had to pick. It's nice to be optimistic and have that piece in there, but boy, I think you have to be realistic in these times and weigh all the factors.
As a leader, again, speed or perfection?
Oh boy. How about neither? Speed is important. Perfectionism can be the root of all evil. So that'd be my answer to that.
Do you hire as a leader? Do you hire for skill or attitude?
Well, people with good attitudes, it'd be helpful if they had some good skills behind them, but people with good attitudes are usually go-getters. They want to learn. They want to be part of a team. And sometimes attitude wins out.
Yes. All right, last one. And I mean, it's obvious, really, but I don't know, really, this really is not a leadership question, but now that I'm thinking about it as I wrote these questions, reading a book or listening to a podcast?
Well, I prefer reading a book because there's no commercials.
Excellent. All right, that's good. That's a good answer. I like it. Okay, Rebecca, cool. Thanks for playing along with us on that. All right, so mindful communication. Tell us about what that is and what's kind of the elevator pitch of what your organization or your company does.
Sure. Well, you asked to give a little background so you can understand where I'm coming from. I began as a speech and language pathologist in a clinical setting. In Boston, it was Lakey Clinic. It was my dream job. And I had a wonderful opportunity to learn a lot about people and help as many people as possible. And if for your audience, if you're not familiar what a speech pathologist does, I worked with strokes, head injuries, um, head and neck cancer, many things. And because of that diversity in communication uh, conditions, I had the pleasure of working with many different kinds of physicians, which taught me a lot. Taught me a lot about leadership, about team building, and how communication affects outcomes, patient outcomes. That was huge. So from there, I was drawn to cognitive and emotional health, and in particular, working with people with ADHD and executive dysfunction. So we moved to Florida, and here I am at my coaching practice. It's called Core Coaching. And I work with adult professionals with ADHD primarily, but my parallel passion is teaching mindful listening to businesses.
What is that's great segue. So what do you consider and what is mindful listening?
Mhm. Mindful listening evolved from the roots of active listening. Carl Rogers, a noted psychoanalyst in 1957, coined the phrase active listening. And what he intended was an empathic, deeply passionate kind of way of connecting with another person. It was therapeutic listening, basically. Right? Well, as I began to study mindful listening, and what brought me to it was at Leahy, I was asked to come up with a seminar for physicians on listening. So I had to do this research, and Carl Rogers was the first that came to mind. I wanted to learn about his method of active listening, which ended up over time, over the years since 1957, being taught as discrete steps, things that you're supposed to do when you're trying to listen to someone. But that kind of a method gets in the way. If you're having to keep in mind all the things that you're supposed to do, like pay attention, reflect back on the speaker, note their, all the things, then you end up losing the message. It's like a crowded garage where there's no room for the car, right? So, so I created this method and I practiced it and did many workshops to test out the method. And basically, what mindful listening does, it helps people go from a list of things to do to a mindset shift. This is what Carl Rogers intended, and this is what I brought to my workshops. Mindful listening is a combination of these things that you sense as a speaker, is that you sense that the listener is focused, is picking up your whole message, not just your words, but the listener is immersed in you, not in their agenda. They're able to sustain attention over time, which is something that's very difficult for people these days in this age of distraction.
Sure, we're gonna get into that in a second. Yeah.
Well, people feel valued and respected from a mindful listener. And the other thing that a mindful listener does, one level up, is they listen carefully to themselves. They pick their words carefully so as to dispel conflict, to get people to speak honestly and convincingly and
Yeah.
truthfully. Listening to yourself is very important, and it's something that we all need to work on in order to have good connections and collaboration with people.
So you work with CEOs and you mentioned earlier, the ADHD and the CEO that's always or the executive that's always here, there, and everywhere. That's to me, that sounds like a big challenge. Talk us through that. If I'm your CEO and I come into your office and I'm like, Rebecca, help me. Um, Maybe that's not exactly what they say, but work with me. What are some of the first steps you take to help that client?
Yeah. Well, first of all, every person is different. It's not, we don't go by so much the diagnosis as it is the symptoms because people bring different experiences and different levels of competency to the picture. A lot of people with ADHD, because they have reached that CEO level, have actually learned to compensate quite well, but there's still issues that remain. Distraction is a big one. These wonderful ADHD brains have ideas coming at all angles. They love novelty. They're idea machines. But the trouble is narrowing that focus and prioritizing what the best ideas are, taking some time to really sift them through in order to understand next steps. So that's a big one. Managing all those ideas that are coming into play. Being able to focus and lock in is challenging for these folks as a result of that. Other things that come into play is the problem with hyperfocus. Now, hyperfocus can be a great thing when you're locked into something, but sometimes people have troubles making transitions. That's a big one.
Transitions can be really hard for anybody, right? You're locked in. That's a word the young people use today, but then you have to move on, especially a busy executive, a busy person. Doesn't have to be an executive.
Very, very difficult. So there's many challenges to the person with ADHD. Distraction is a big one, but the focus, the concentration, communication issues come into play
Yeah.
as well. Being able to have the patience to listen to people who are having difficulties articulating themselves,
Yeah.
that is often a challenge too. So they sometimes come across as hasty and and not very intentional in communication. And that's not true.
No, I agree with that. I want to go back for a second. You mentioned so you're in Boston and your organization says we want you to help doctors be better listeners, right? That's really interesting to me because obviously as a doctor, you need to be able the patient needs to be able to communicate what's wrong or ailing them, and the doctor needs to listen and form that analysis. How did that process work, and what were some of the steps you took there?
Well, it was again shifting them from thinking that they have a list of things they have to do and keeping in mind to just shifting to a state of wanting to understand that client and being curious. Sometimes, too, it's a matter of calming them down so they can listen as well, right? Because you've got to have a listening method that endures with stress. And that's why the mindful listening method works nicely. So we practice making that shift. So I would sit down with physicians and I would say, okay, let the patient talk. Do you know that physicians will interrupt the client in less than 13 seconds into the interaction? If you let a patient talk, they will tell you everything they need to know quite often about the diagnosis, but that rarely happens. So, getting physicians comfortable with silence
Yes.
was
Yes.
the challenge. That was just one of the things that we would work on in the
I
workshops.
was just gonna mention that as of now, I'm far from a physician. I didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night or play one on TV, but, um, that's a really important skill for reporters. I talk about that all the time is the ability as a reporter to let the person you're asking a question, let there be a pause. And that can be really hard, right? Because it's just air. It's just nothing's happening. And I'm giving a shout out to former Bell's retailer in Bradenton CEO Steve Knopick was the most patient person I've ever interviewed. He would pause for almost 10 seconds, and it was a great learning ground for me because I had to just sit there and wait. But he was so thoughtful, and what he would say would be really good, and I would scribble and I would use it. But that was a key lesson. How do you get your clients to be patient and not fill the air? Or what are some of the tips you would suggest?
Mhm. Well, there is a principle in active listening that I very much appreciate, and that is called the tellback. And I think you've heard of this before. It's paraphrasing back what someone said. Is allowing that time for them to say what they need to say and following what is called that 10-second rule to make sure that there isn't anything else coming from a deeper level. That's the hard part. So I would practice with physicians just uh, going back and forth in couples. We would do these exercises where we would just look at each other. We would get comfortable with that silence And then telling back once that person re-engaged in the conversation, telling back to make sure that you understood what that person had to say and asking for clarification. And then again, allowing that pause time to get to the deeper level of what is concerning to that patient. So it's a series, it's practice, it's series of exercises. I often had a fantasy that I would do a TED talk and I would get up in front of the group. And for the first 2 minutes, I would just stand there and scan the audience and watch them squirm
Two
as they
minutes, Rebecca, 2 minutes?
would that be something? What an observation.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, as I get into this podcast, I'm nervous that 2 seconds is too long to go with nothing. 2 minutes, that's a
Yeah.
lot of time,
Can you
a
imagine?
lot of air.
But one other, so how do we do that? I suggest that that physicians or anybody who wants to be a good communicator, getting comfortable with silence is huge. That's that mindset shift where you forget yourself and you get into the what I call the movie of the person. Meditation is a very good way to do that. I suggest many of my CEOs who, especially the ones who have ADHD and executive functioning issues, to be able to pause and to feel comfortable in that pause. Because in that pause time helps you choose better routes of saying and doing things. So, meditation, 10 minutes a day in a quiet place, helps you start to become comfortable with silence. Mindful walking, just being in the present tense with the walk, with nature, when other thoughts come into your mind, letting them pass and getting back to the mindful meditation walking, if that's your way. But we need to practice that kind of pausing. It doesn't come natural in this age of distraction.
No, it doesn't. You mentioned 2 things that come up a lot in this podcast, Rebecca, curiosity and clarity. How important is that, as a leader to be curious and to provide that clarity in the work that you do?
It's very curious because, it's very curious to be curious.
Yes.
If we listen with curiosity, the speaker gets the feeling that we really care and that we want to understand. And if there is stress in that conversation, if there's any conflict to be found, it calms the waters. What's interesting too, Mark, is when you listen in a mindful way to understand, to be curious, not self immersed, but other immersed, there's a synchrony, a measurable physiological synchrony that occurs between people. Heart rate decreases, breath rate slows down. You unintentionally start to uh, take on the same facial expression and posture of your speaker. These are magical things, actually, not so magical, they're measurable, that occur in a mindful listening moment that people can walk away from.
Yeah, really cool. All right, something else you mentioned earlier, the AI era. We're recording here in early June, and it's now as we're recording, it's almost 10:30. Before this call, I spent my first hour of the day reading a report on AI and fighting the urge to have AI summarize the report. I wanted to read the actual entire report, which I did. Um, so I say all that to preface, why is it important for leaders to upgrade to be better at these listening skills in the era of AI?
Yes. Short answer, speed and efficiency is everything in the AI era. A company's success relies upon collaboration with employees when it comes to the rollout of these AI adoption things. Right, very important. So, for those who are not familiar with what is that AI adoption process, it's how AI tools are selected and integrated into the workflow. It's a continuous process. It's going to happen over and over again within a company because new tools are constantly coming down the pipe. The thing is AI adoption is not a technical problem as much as it is a trust problem. And this is the connection with listening. Employees are generally skeptical fearful of losing their jobs or distrustful of the AI because they're not being heard. They're not being brought to the table to understand the strategy and to select and integrate the tools as a team. That is where companies are falling short. For an example, Pew Research 52% of workers are very uneasy about using AI in the workplace. And a recent Gallup poll was 32% said employees are extremely uncomfortable
Sure.
with it. So let me give you an example. Would you like to hear a little quick vignette?
I would.
Okay. I have a client right now who's a veterinarian who works in a hospital slash animal clinic. They're understaffed, they're overwhelmed, they're a high quality group, but they're owned by a group of bosses who are not medical people. All right. And what these bosses noted was that patient care units were falling short of the administrative time. In other words, documentation administrative was taking up too much time, right? And taking away from patient care. So they said, okay, we're gonna dole out an AI tool. We're going to send it down and we want you guys to learn it. We're going to give you a few days to learn it and we want you to implement it and tell us how it's working. So these veterinarians, a small group in this big place, are already overworked. And I said understaffed. So, all right, they took a week and they learned the tool. They found out that this tool was woefully inadequate in quality control. All right. And by the way, there was no training or video or anything supplied to these vets. They had to learn it on their own. So they had to take, a week to 10 days. So what happened is that they mentioned this to the bosses and they said, as a matter of fact, this particular tool was uh, better made for a manufacturing plant. And this is a huge opportunity for liabilities, et cetera. So I told my client, I said, hey, you know what? Get your cadre of veterinarians together, understand that this is what they need in order to, keep the wheels on the bus. Patient care units need to increase, administrative time needs to decrease. What other solutions, AI or not, can you guys come up with and bring that proactively to the bosses so that they understand? And maybe you can now set the table to be heard. But in that time, the point is, in that time, in that week or 10 days, they lost revenue. There were quality issues that abound. There were all sorts of problems that occurred that could have been avoided if they had started off from the get go together, sitting at the same table and listening to each other.
As we said in the beginning, being a better listener, right? It's what we say to our kids when they go to preschool, be a good listener, right? It's something you learn at an early age. Yeah, that's an interesting story. Certainly illustrates it. Rebecca, what are some practical ways that busy leaders can start being more mindful? As we're winding down here in this podcast, what are some tips and tricks for busy leaders to be more mindful listeners?
You bet. And remember, what I said is mindful listening is not a list of discrete steps to remember. It is a mindset shift. So how do we get there? In the book, and probably the most popular method that I came up with was get into the movie of the speaker. And let me give you an example. This is one thing that everybody can do. We can all be good mindful listeners. When you go to the movies, what happens? You forget yourself, your worries are in the parking lot, the room is dark, and you become totally immersed in what's going on that screen with those characters, right? You're not so much judging them. You have your preferences, but you're trying to understand what motivates those actors or those characters to behave the way they are. You have forgotten yourself. Imagine if we could take that mindset and get into the movie of our speaker, forgetting ourselves. How refreshing is that? Putting our agenda aside and trying to understand with curiosity what makes that person talk. That movie mindset is a great metaphor for making that shift, number one. Number two, I think meditation, as I said, is a good one. A little bit of practice, getting comfortable with silence will allow you to get more of the gold from those conversations. That's another one. Here's a very good one, and we've mentioned this before, but I'll bring it up in a little different context, and that is that telling back for clarification. Remember, Mark, you mentioned that that was very important in communication is verifying, right? We have to practice that, though. It's nothing that's going to take, happen uh, instantly. So I tell people this is how you practice it. You turn on a podcast, and at the commercial, you pause and you take time to tell back, even aloud to yourself, what the content was in that segment. Now, when we do this as an exercise, people can recall maybe 25% of what was said. But with practice, you can elevate that to 75, 80%. So you can practice being accountable for what comes through your ears. Right? Very good practice. It's also very good brain training, very good for memory, because when you do tell back, it helps you restore that information and keep it in the forefront. And that helps the recall and the follow through and the development of the trust because people have not only been heard, but the follow through has been good as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
tell back is very, very powerful exercise.
Excellent. Tellback, movie in the mind of the speaker. Love it. Meditation, all good ones. Rebecca's, we're coming up here in the summer. What's next for you? What do you got? What's big the rest of 2026 for you?
Well, I tend to try to get out this message of listening in the AI era. I'd like leaders to realize that this is an opportunity to amplify their human skills so that they maintain that advantage with AI. And I want to get across to leaders that the most successful companies will combine AI capabilities and those human traits that cannot be replicated, the ability to build relationships, to collaborate, and to strategically use communication as a way of being successful in the companies.
Excellent. Great way to end it. Rebecca Shafir, founder of Mindful Communication and author of The Zen of Listening, Mindful Communication in the Age of Distraction. Thank you so much for joining us on From the Corner Office podcast.
Thank you so much, Bart.
Thank you for listening to the Business Observer From the Corner Office podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gordon. This podcast was produced by Reed Corley of the Corley Company in Sarasota. To hear more episodes of From the Corner Office podcast, go to businessobserverfl.com.